Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another episode of Property Law Alliance. We fastly approaching our 150th episode, so well done to the team for keeping it going and for continuously sharing the knowledge. Thank you, guys. And then today we've got two questions. One is for Nick and the other is for Bruno, which we'll deal with later. And for Nick, our first question deals with the sale of a property through a company. But basically what we have is a property investor and they are into property flipping and they've found this really good deal and they made an offer on the property, and somewhere through the deal, the seller was like, hold on a minute, and rather gave the purchaser a different sort of approach and said, please just perhaps buy the property, buy shares in the company that basically owns the property. So the question then becomes, Nick, is that a good idea? And if it is, or if it's not, what are some of the things that you need to look out for when buying shares in a company that perhaps owns a property?
Okay, so perfect. Look, with regards to is it a good idea, this is one of those things. When you come to property transactions, there are a number of ways to do things and ways to transfer property and vehicles that you can transfer properties into when you're in the market, and a transaction's happening between a buyer and seller. Are they good? Are they bad? This is really a question for each particular transaction. There's no such thing as, always transfer into a company or always do it through a sale of shares or whatever the case is. It's really a question of the particular transaction. However, in circumstances like this, obviously we've got a seller who's got their property which is sitting in a vehicle of some kind, a company, a PTY Ltd, and they're selling off to a particular project. And you can, in circumstances where you have a transaction like this, either sell the property outright, and then the company would be sold from the company to the prospective purchaser, or as this particular seller in the circumstances indicated, why don't you buy the shares out of the company? And in that way, the purchaser is not buying the property, they're buying the company, the vehicle that the property is held in itself, and thereby the property transfers, well, doesn't really transfer, it moves along with the property to the new purchaser. Okay, and the new purchaser now becomes the shareholder in the company, and the company still owns that particular property in the circumstances. So this is a way of doing things. Okay, in certain circumstances, this might be a good transaction to do. Okay, just depends what the purchaser wants to do. So remember, the purchaser in this circumstance have indicated that they actually want to on-sell this property. Okay, so they're doing this from a flip perspective rather than I'm going to buy this property and use it, or I'm going to buy this property and now rent it going forward. Okay, so what the purchaser does need to think about is, if you're going to participate in this transaction where you've now purchased the shares in this company, now you own this particular company. I'm assuming that because that is the suggestion from the seller, this company, its only asset that's going to be sitting within the particular vehicle is this property. Okay, it's very unlikely there's other stuff within the company that's also going to be transferred along with it. I mean, but if there is, that's one of the considerations that has to be taken by the purchaser. Is there anything else in this property that you need to, or in this vehicle that you need to be aware of? It's very unlikely that's going to happen, because the seller's not going to give away another property gratis or whatever the case is. Okay, so that needs to be considered, and the purchaser needs to consider, well, if I'm going to now flip and on-sell this, on-sell this property, okay, that's perfectly fine, but they've got to remember that this company is now belongs to them, but the company is going to be dead in essence, because there's going to be nothing left in this particular company. And what are they then going to do with this particular asset that now sits on their name? It's likely, very likely, they'll close down the company or whatever the case is, unless they have some other intention to use the company for whatever means. It doesn't sound like it from this particular question that we've been asked, but they could do something else with the company, or they can close the company down. In that regard, they do need to be careful, because remember, this company now might have other things on its books that can come out of the woodwork and hurt the purchaser in the circumstances. So you need to be very careful. When you are a purchaser of a property, you are looking, and we've done talks about this before, where you need to look at all of the relevant factors that affect this property. You need to be looking at, what are the outstanding rates, or is there anything, wrong with the particular property, stuff that can come out of the woodwork. The minute you're doing this share transaction where you're purchasing a company, you now need to be looking into that company itself together with the property. Okay, so don't think that you can skip the property assessments and make sure that property is standing properly and it's not going to collapse on you the day you take it over. You need to do that assessment. You now need to also be doing an assessment into the vehicle which you are now purchasing, because you're going to have some liability with regards to that vehicle. It may be that this is a PTY LTD, where something is, and it's very likely it's a PTY LTD, which has a separate liability from you as a shareholder in the company in any event. So there's a chance that there's not too much risk, taking on a company like that, but you don't know what liabilities that company is sitting with, and that's something you need to assess very carefully. Your seller in the circumstances is going to be the right person who's going to be able to come and say, look, are there any other liabilities that this company has that I need to know about? The chances are 9 times out of 10, the company only has this particular property, and this question does sound like this company has only this particular property, and that's all the liabilities are linked to that property. Again, you're going to have to look very carefully at what does it owe in respect of rates, taxes, does it have any other liabilities towards banks, okay, on that particular property that you're going to take on. And these are questions you need to ask your purchaser in the circumstances. But as for, is this a good or a bad transaction? No, there's no such thing as good or bad transaction. It might just be a way of doing it in the circumstances where you can, get the property moved over in a particular way, which might suit you in the circumstances.
Sure.
Yeah. So I guess it just goes back to the old saying that just always make sure that you do your homework and your due diligence whenever you do purchase a property, and however, so whatever comes with the property essentially becomes part of your liability as well. And obviously you don't want to take on any unnecessary burdens, whether it be expenses or any criminal activity, honestly.
Look, and I think the one thing, sorry, that I haven't touched on there, but because it's not framed within the question, there are some clever ways of doing these transactions where you can sort of gear yourself to address tax or capital gains or whatever the case is. But in this particular question, the question wasn't framed in a sense that how do I best make use of my tax liability in the circumstances. So I'm just taking it from a perspective of, is this a good way to do a property transaction? There are some big questions about how do you deal with capital gains or tax or whatever the case is. But it doesn't seem to me that the question was framed in that particular way. And that's a very complex issue as well, where you actually need to look at the transaction itself to go, well, how do we deal with tax in the circumstance?
Absolutely.
Sure.
Yeah, well, there we have it with that question. Thank you very much once again, Nick. And